possible.
Tonight in Greater Boston, 2 men, both sentenced to life in prison as teens before ultimately being released. They join me on how they've dedicated their lives since to helping people like them once released and bringing together those who've committed crimes with those victimized by them. Armand Coleman and Sean Ellis, whose story was told in the Netflix documentary Trial 4, they share their stories ahead. Then do the Democrats have a messaging problem? Less than a week before final midterm ballots are cast, some are wondering whether the party may have had too many different election priorities and not enough focus on what most Americans rate as their #1 priority, the economy. Armand Coleman was just 17 years old when he shot a fellow teen at a Roxbury club. He was tried as an adult, sentenced to life in prison for second-degree murder. He ultimately served 28 years, openly repenting for his crime and focusing on healing and restorative justice, both for those convicted and for victims of crimes. Then in 2019, he was released following a Supreme Court ruling that declared it unconstitutional to sentence a minor to life in prison. Sean Ellis was 19 when he was arrested for the murder of police detective John Mulligan. His first 2 trials ended in hung juries. He was convicted in a third. Then years later, Boston police detectives who were integral to that conviction pled guilty to corruption charges, casting obvious doubt on their testimony. In 2015, Sean's murder conviction was overturned, and after more than 2 decades in prison, he was released. He went on to co-found the Exoneree Network and now serves as its director. Sean joins me along with Armand Coleman. He's now the executive director of the Transformational Prison Project. Armand, Sean, it's great to see you both.
Yes, I see you, Jim.
When did you guys first meet?
What year was that?
2013.
Okay.
Where was it?
At Norfolk, at MCI Norfolk.
In prison?
In prison.
At 2013. And you guys started working together pretty quickly on a bunch of things. Prisoners' rights, prison conditions, restorative justice. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so this is an amazing story, right? So I was 20 years into my incarceration as a youth. Spent the majority, all of my time in maximum security prison, and then I was transitioned to MCI Norfolk, where Sean was already like in a leadership position. So literally, like, Sean was one of the handful of men that literally like held my hand and walked me, helped me transition into that institution.
And what did you guys do together? I mean, you started working on programs for fellow inmates, and as I said, restorative justice stuff. What exactly were you doing?
So I'll let Sean speak for us. But Sean was an elected official in the prison. And he had
elected official
within the prison, and he had an office space, and he allowed me to come to the office space, speak with the team, process stuff, and on a nightly basis.
And what were you working on? What were the kind of projects you and some others did together?
So some of the things that I did as an elected official at Norfolk was work on the conditions of prisoners' rights there, whether it was food, whether it was just the average conditions. But then I dealt with that. But then we also dealt with coming up with restorative justice sort of circles. Actually, Armand and I co-facilitated a restorative justice circle at Norfolk.
That's a Jericho Circle thing?
It's not necessarily Jericho Circle. That's kind of where I did some of my own work inside of Norfolk. But
can I say, like, restorative justice is an indigenous practice, right? This is a practice that's used to, like, but address harm and hurt that people have.
On both sides of the equation.
On both sides of the issue.
Correct. Do you put yourselves at risk when you're doing those kinds of things, when you're inside? You're both smiling. Yes.
Yeah, definitely on the inside, and from 2 different angles. One is, from the administration. So some of the work that Armand and I did on the inside, it was necessary. We kind of squashed gang beef on the inside, and kind of helped to mentor and monitor some of the younger prisoners from like into programming, so to speak. And so that was some of the things that we did.
But at risk. I mean, you can be disciplined for doing these kinds of constructive things by prison officials, right?
Absolutely.
You never told me about this elected official thing, meaning your fellow inmates elected you as a representative of them.
Yes.
My God. Okay, so then you get out. Let's talk about what you faced, because that's what a lot of the work that you guys are spending. What was hardest for you when you got out? 28 years, right?
The hardest thing for me when I got out is still the hardest thing today, which is building community. I was born and raised in New York, so when I came out, and I spent my whole life in prison, right? Think about it. I've been in prison my whole life. I never had a driver's license, never had adult experience, adult relationship, none of that. And all the adults that I know are formerly incarcerated people that helped save my life, and I'm forbidden to interact with any of them. So that's been the hardest thing, building my own community of support and moving forward.
Well, you know, stay on that just for a second. We haven't talked about that before. Another word for that, I guess, is loneliness, in essence. I mean, you built a family. The majority of your life had been spent with sort of family members behind bars. That were your relationships. And as you say, which I don't think we think enough about, is when you get out and try to build a support network, you're precluded from even associating with a lot of people who could provide you support. So how hard is that?
That's hard. That's hard. I want to just say, I'm happy you just named it loneliness. I remember when I was interviewing for my release, I asked one of the guys who was interviewing me, who was formerly incarcerated, what's the biggest challenge you had? And he said to me, loneliness.
Really? And
I was like very judgmental in my mind. I was like, yo, you're out, dude. What do you mean lonely? But literally, that's the primary thing that I face.
And Sean, we've talked about this before, but people haven't seen it. What were the major obstacles, the major things you had to deal with that you just weren't ready for when you got out?
I mean, it's certain realizations at different times, but just, you know, establishing and having just certain relationships, being able to process things emotionally, which I didn't have to do when I was in there. Work and trying to find work, trying to process, not process, but balance a checkbook.
You told me you didn't know how to turn on a laptop.
I didn't.
When you got someone had to show you how to turn on a computer. Forget how to use a computer.
Turn on the computer, turn on the phone. One of the first things that happened when I came home is my baby sister threw me a phone, and I looked at it, and the screen was black, and there was no buttons on it. I'm like, what do I do with this? And
the housing and employment and all the key things that allow people to live a decent kind of life. So as a result of all this, Transformational Prison Project. Explain to people, I'm going to give you a website in a minute.
Yes.
Explain to people what you do there.
Yes, so the Transformational Prison Project actually began in the bowels of MCI Norfolk. Like literally in the basement where he had his office, right?
With that elected official, is that how you meant?
Exactly, like so we used their space actually to found our organization. It was founded by all formerly incarcerated people, all men serving loss of life crimes. And we delivered program services to men inside. And then we extended all the way to the women's prison, right? Because we had an external component. But today we deliver reentry service to formerly incarcerated people. We're in a unique position where we worked 10 years giving people programming inside, and now those same people are coming home. So we actually work to build community, like the things, like I know what I suffered from and what I dealt with, so we actually use ourselves as models to deliver services that are needed.
You say you know what you suffered from. A story that included you in the Boston Globe earlier this year. I want to read a quote to you from you, and I want you to explain it to me a little bit if you can, Armand. You said, I thought I did it because I was an ill dude, or they said a bad dude. Me recognizing myself as a victim first allowed me to acknowledge the people that I victimized. What does that mean?
Oh, so what does that mean is that, like, and I got to credit my director of programs with this Noble. He always says hundreds of crimes were committed against me before I committed one crime. Like even my crime that I committed that landed me in prison, through the restorative justice process, I was able to find out what was the thing that led to the thing that led to me committing the crime.
And you're not saying you're not responsible for what you did.
Not.
You're just saying people have to understand the trauma that so many men and women go through early in their lives and what the impact that is.
Exactly.
So Exoneree Network, we talked about it a little bit, again, recently when you were here, Sean, but if people didn't see it, explain what you're doing there.
So what the Exoneree Network does is we provide practical, spiritual, and emotional support for exonerees coming home. Like what I found out and other exonerees found out is that when we came home to nothing. And there was nobody kind of there except for our loved ones to give us support. And so we came together and started talking and figuring out what are the things that we have to do in order to make sure our transition is pretty smooth.
Like what? I mean, like, do you help people if someone doesn't have housing? Do you help them that? If they just need to talk to somebody? Are those the kinds of things?
So to be specific, we help with housing support. We help with mental health support. We help with tech training for laptops and phones. And
does the average person give a damn what happens to men and women who've been in prison? I mean, do you find in the world at large that people care? I mean, do they? You know what I mean?
I think they care once they understand. Like,
what does that mean?
Meaning, if you sat in a space with the Transformational Prison Project, we would literally like speak to like what he's going through, what I'm going through, and you would be able to relate and associate. I actually did a program recently with guys who are veterans. He started literally talking about his transition from war to civilian life, right? And we were able to connect around that. So literally now they're our partners, right? They're our allies. They want to work with us because they see how we have more in common than we don't.
And when you say to mostly men, but some women who've committed some pretty horrible crimes, that what's important is this restorative justice thing, that we do have to reach out to the people you victimized. Is there a willingness to do that, or does it require a lot of pushing, a lot of persuading?
There is no willingness, right? But we had a tried and tested method. Like Sean told you, he was like one of the first people to do restorative justice in Norfolk, and the reason was we actually realized that we had to start with people who were considered the most incorrigible ones, right? Even though he was innocent, right?
Yeah.
The most incorrigible ones, like, so we started with lifers first. And when you start with them first, literally everybody comes behind and follows. But one thing
Sean's nodding in agreement, by the way, as you're talking.
Yes, but one thing we had to realize, and people still push back, but we had to first acknowledge that thing I just said to you earlier. What happened to them first? Once I acknowledge what happened to you first, show empathy what happened to you first, then you can own what you did and start to show empathy and accountability for what you did.
You know, it seems to me, you know, Armand says that ultimately people, when they learn, do care. I don't really care that much if they care because you're human beings, or if they care because they want you to stay clean and live a decent life outside, which is good for them as well. So it seems to me this work is like unbelievably important. Last time you were here, you just received, what, a $250,000 grant from the state. How is funding with the Exoneree Network?
So funding is a work in progress. We're still growing. We're still seeking funding, and so that's the best way for me to explain it. Like, there's a lot of work to do, Jim. And what I mean when I say that is in terms of developing the programs that need to be developed that we know work, because we are the model, we are the experts in it. Because not only were we in prison, but we went through the process of I don't say programming ourselves, but developing the programs that then were implemented while inside of
And you can
prison.
show results.
And we can show results.
Where's your money coming from? I don't mean dictate your funding list for me, but what kind of money and from what sort? Individuals, foundations?
Individuals, foundation. We also got some state funding last year. But funding as director of the organization, the last year I had to learn that funding occupies 85% of my job title at the moment. So,
you know, and we're going to give websites in a minute if you want to learn more about the organizations, volunteer, contribute. You know, one of the things I'm amazed by, the more I get to know you, and I've known Armand a little bit, I am amazed by how there seems to be this relentless passion to give back, even from people from whom so much has been taken away. You're not exceptions to the rule. There are a lot of people like you.
Definitely. Even from the standpoint of guys who are still inside of prison, developing programming models, there's still guys in prison doing that. But the thing about Armand and I and others that are of like similar character is we understand that it first starts with us.
Understood.
And then once it starts with us, then we kind of grow it out and trying to affect the culture.
Before you go, there's a rumor that when you were in prison, you used to listen to the radio. Is that true?
What?
What kind of shows did you listen to? I'm just curious.
Yeah, so I spent a lot of time in maximum security. A lot of time is isolation, right? Over a decade. And I started actually listening to Marjorie and Jim Braude on 96.9 during the presidential debacle, right? And that got me through every day. I listen to them. I listen to y'all every single day, sometimes twice a day, because they used to do rebroadcasts.
You're unbelievable.
And that's why I learned a lot of my stuff around politics.
Well, I've learned a lot from you, too, and from you, Sean. It's thrilling, and Marjorie will love to hear that, too. Gentlemen, Armand, good luck with your work. We'll give you information in a minute. Sean,
can I give you something before I go?
Yeah, sure. Yes.
So
what do you got?
So I have this Transformational Prison Project shirt that we're going to give you. This is our motto: hurt people, heal people, heal people. Yes, and I'm pretty sure you can fit this one, Jim.
I hope it's XXXL.
I'm not going to go there. And I got one for Marjorie as well, small.
Great.
Right.
I think that'll fit her. Gentlemen, it's good to see you. I really wish you good luck with your work, and I hope you stay in touch so we can continue to talk about it. Thank you so much. Here's the deal. You can find more information, I hope you will, online at newenglandinnocence.org and transformprison.org. Sean is also hosting a virtual event tomorrow called Voices of the Innocent. You can find out more about that at newenglandinnocence.org as well. With just days to go until final ballots are cast, Democrats across the country are starting to wonder whether they went with the right messages to win over voters. And if you don't know what the Democrats' central message has been, apparently you are not alone.
Democracy is on the ballot this year.
Women's concerns about their freedom are very, very much still very significant in terms of how they will vote.
The only way to make this economy fair is if we, all of us, fight for it.
Contraception is on the line. Marriage equality is on the line. With Republican Party leaders in charge, health care is on the line. Social Security would be on the line. Medicare would be on the line. Good jobs and fair wages for working families on the line.
A lot of election-defining issues to keep track of, and not a whole lot of talk about what Democrats actually accomplished over the last few years, like the American Rescue Plan, which resulted in stimulus checks, more unemployment payments, local aid, and expanded the child tax credit, all over unanimous rejection from Republicans. The Inflation Reduction Act, which put money toward renewable energy production, fighting climate change, lowering prescription drug costs. Again, not a single Republican supporter. Then there were bipartisan victories with increased investment in water, energy, and broadband infrastructure, strengthening of gun control. But do voters even know what Democrats have delivered? I'm joined by Steve Kerrigan, who was the 2014 Democratic nominee for Lieutenant Governor, CEO of the Democratic National Convention not too long ago, and currently serves as the president and CEO of the Edward M. Kennedy Community Health Center. Steve, it's great to see you. Raul Alvalar is the Harvard Institute of Politics fellow who has worked on the presidential campaigns of Al Gore, Barack Obama, and Joe Biden. 2 out of 3 ain't bad, Raul. You know what I mean?
Right.
Good to see you both, and good to meet you.
Likewise.
So people like Governor Newsom from California have said things like, we, meaning the Democratic Party, we're getting crushed on the narrative. Do you agree with him?
There, to an extent, yes. But, you know, we're doing a good job in making sure that when our candidates are running, they're running in their local races, whether it's, you know, their local congressional race, whether it's a local Senate race. And I also think that it's important for the down ballot races too, like Secretary of States and legislatures, legislative races. I think those will also help. And so I think the message is talk to your voters, talk to your folks, and make sure you tell them what you're doing and what you're going to do for them.
Well, you know, to add to the Newsom narrative there, Steve, a lot of people are saying Carville is right 30 years later. It is the economy stupid, and there's not enough focus on it. Bernie Sanders is one of these people, by the way. Yeah. Not enough focus on it by Democrats running for high offices.
So I don't know where that comes from, because you just saw the vice president, you saw President Obama, so many surrogates are out there talking about the economy, the impact. By the way,
while they're talking about abortion and contraception,
by the way, abortion
and the fall of
and
democracy.
contraception are economic issues, because if a woman is forced to have a family when she doesn't want to or can't afford to, that's an economic issue.
100%.
It's also a small business issue. I mean, all of these things.
So you have no problem with the messaging?
Well, what's surprising to me is that this story is coming now and not maybe 3 days ago. This story gets written every time we come up to an election.
It was in that right-wing rag, the New York Times front page, by the way.
We're our own worst enemies, Jim. We're our own worst enemies. But everybody wants to wring hands and talk about what we can't, what we aren't doing, when they should be using those hands to knock on doors.
You know, if the most important issue to me is democracy. Unfortunately, most voters don't agree. If Abe Lincoln was an election denier, I would not support him. But in light of the fact that it's not resonating with most of America, when I read this morning that Joe Biden was going to dedicate a night 6 days before the final election day to an issue, again, that is central to me, but not a lot of voters, what does that say? What's that about?
You know, I think that there's actually an undercurrent, and I think that that is on the ballot. I 100% think so. I think we're seeing that because we have people voting in huge numbers already at early voting, right?
And you think that's a reflection on that issue?
It's a number of issues, right? But the point that I'm making here is that those are already in the bank, right? So I think these last few days, and as you know, we all know here, 6 days is a long time in politics, right? So I think there will be some of those issues and I think we'll be resurrecting, especially with that issue, especially with what happened to the speaker's husband in San Francisco.
You know, by the way, Marjorie Egan, my radio co-host, I think agrees with me about the importance of democracy hanging by a thread, but she would say for most voters it's an abstraction, meaning even those of us who can recite the words like me. Does the average person even know what I'm talking about? What does it mean, democracy is at risk? What does it mean? What's Biden going to say?
Well, I don't know what the president's going to say, but
what should he say?
Well, he should say that all of the things you care about, whether it is abortion rights or it's gun rights or it's your grandparents' Social Security or your Social Security or Medicare, Medicaid, all of those things are at risk when people don't get the right to vote. All of those things are at risk when we're electing, I don't know how many election deniers from 2020 election across the country. All of that thing is at risk. And your basic right to vote as an American is what you have to exercise to protect those things. So I hope that's what he's saying. I'm sure he's saying something similar to that.
Okay, there's a guy you both worked for who gave a speech at a rally in Wisconsin earlier this week. Here he is.
If there was an asteroid headed towards Earth, it's going to land in like 2 weeks. If you went in the Republican caucus and you said, what do you want to do? Well, we need a tax break for the wealthy. That's going to help.
You know, even though, sadly, that may be true, I would bet if you stopped 100 people on the street who are at least thinking of voting for a Republican, and you said, what do they stand for, even if they have no idea how to do it? Economy, crime. They have made clear that's what they stand for. Again, stand, I use the term loosely. Could you say the same thing about Democrats without doing a laundry list? And again, I'm not quarreling with you guys. Every one of those issues is important. But when you do a lot, you tend to lose focus. Could you do the same for the Democrats? What's at the top of their list?
Well, I think at the top of the list is I think we do need to talk about the economy and all of the good stuff that we have done. You mentioned a few at the top of the segment, right?
What are you going to do for me tomorrow would be my response to that, no?
Well, I'm going to make sure you have health care. Democrats are going to make sure you have a paying job. Democrats are going to make sure that you have health care for your grandparents. God forbid they get sick. You know, we are that party. We have to take back that message back from the Republicans. Right. I think they've been trying to take that from us as Democrats. So we have to do that, and it's up to the candidates to do that as well, and make sure that they're letting the voters know.
You know, Obama's one of the greatest campaigners I've ever seen in my life. I mean, reaffirmed this week. The other thing he said, he urged Democrats, don't be a, quote, buzzkill, he said, making people walk on eggshells when it comes to issues like race and gender. You're nodding in agreement. What do you mean?
Look, I think people need to be more bold and proud. Like, it took us decades after Roe v. Wade for anybody to say the word abortion at a Democratic National Convention. We wanted that right. We fought hard for that right, but no one wanted to say it. Now everyone talks about it. We have to be more bold. And I will say, there's the old adage, you ask a 1,000 Republicans what they stand for, they give you one answer. You ask 1,000 Democrats, they give you 10,000 answers.
Yeah. Right.
And that's fine, because a race...
Well, it's not fine.
Well, it is, really? Because a race that Maggie Hassan's running is much different than a race that Maura Healey's running. A race that Mike Franken's running out in Iowa is much different than a race that's being run down in Texas. I mean,
100%.
Democrats need to be able to respond to the issues in their district and connect with the voters on the issues that they care about and what they're going to be voting.
So does what you're both saying suggest, starting with you, Steve, that you don't buy the notion that this is an election trending towards Republicans, not just in the House, but likely in the Senate, too? You don't buy that?
No, look, it's been 40 years or so where in the first midterms of a president, they lose seats. We just have fewer to lose, so it's a tighter margin. So
5 in the House,
yeah,
and none in the Senate.
And so yes, in some cycles, losing 20 seats might not flip the majority, but it's going to in this race. So I don't buy that our message is the reason why. History might be one of the reasons why, but I'll tell you, we have some of the best candidates that we've ever had, and we're fighting for the causes that I think the majority of Americans, 8 in 10, believe in legal access to abortion. The majority of Americans believe in the Democrats' economic policies. They see the benefits. Joe Biden's been the most successful president from a legislative perspective in our memory. People see that. If we can connect with them on the doors, which is what we should be doing with our hands and not ringing them, we're going to win the election.
What do you see well, people are voting already. I was going to say election day is no longer election. Right. The final day of elections next Tuesday.
In terms of who's going to win?
Well, I mean, do you reject the narrative that, by the way, is coming from nonpartisan people in the news, that this is an election trending towards the Republicans?
Yeah. So before I came on the show, I did a couple of calls to some folks that are actually on the ground, particularly in Nevada, in Florida, even with this race against Marco Rubio. I think that might be kind of an interesting race to see and see what happens there.
Nevada's arguably the closest race in the country, absolutely dead heat.
100%. And so
with an incumbent Democrat, for those who don't know.
Right. But I mean, they're an exception because they were devastated economically with COVID, right? So that's resonating. But I think But you can't underestimate the power of the culinary folks on the ground there. You can't underestimate the numbers of people that are there on the ground talking to people. I was involved yesterday with a text bank where we were texting folks from the Harvard Democrats. And so we were getting a response. And one of the students told me, which was, I think, kind of interesting to me, and why I go back to what happened to Pelosi's husband has people worried, is that literally when they were on the door, they knocked on the door, and one of the voters said to them, and this is a young student, said, "Don't go over there because they may not like you being at their house talking about Joe Biden." So I think if people start realizing that and start seeing that, and it sets something off. Because you shouldn't have to be afraid of going to your neighbor's house. So I think those are some of the things that are the undercurrent that are going to help push some of these candidates over the edge or get them to where they need to be.
Call you both on Wednesday, Raul. It's good to meet you. Thanks so much for your time, Steve. Great to see you as always. Steve Kerrigan, Raul Alvear. That's it for tonight. We will be back tomorrow. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget Ukraine.
In Newton, Massachusetts, there's a star market that overhangs the Mass Turnpike, and I was curious why that was.
I'm Edgar B. Herwick III, and this is the Curiosity Desk. Well, we start things off today in a place that I am confident is familiar to you all, a supermarket. This one is a lot like any other. The coffee's near the tea, the butter's near the milk, and the shelves are stocked with an abundance of options. Now, even if you've never been inside, you've likely driven under this guy. And while the building itself dates to the 1960s, its story begins almost half a century prior.
The Star Market began in Watertown. The first one opened in 1915.
That's Clara Silverstein with Historic Newton.
The owner was named Sarkis Lugar, and he was from Armenia.
Sarkis helmed the Watertown Star Market until 1922, when he died following an automobile accident. His son Stephen took over the store, and in 1930 opened a second Star Market right here in Newtonville. But the boldest leap came in 1948 with the Star Market's first supermarket. But Star Market was immediately on a collision course with the latest thing in roads, the modern highway.
More and more and more cars.
The Turnpike Authority wanted to go through Newtonville and take over the Star Market's parking lot.
The Turnpike Authority got its route, and the Mugars were granted the air rights to build a new store on top of the new Turnpike. The success of the Star Market project fueled the imaginations of developers and city leaders who saw a future with gleaming buildings over the pike. In reality, nothing has been built with air rights west of the city in almost 50 years, and so it stands over the pike today, a nod to Newton's past and to an imagined future that never came to pass. I'm Edgar B. Herwick III. Stay curious out there.